Data centers are the infrastructure for AI in the same way that the road system is the infrastructure for a car.
I think the deeper issue driving it isn't even really the AI or the data centers. I think it's a frustration with how government policy is being set.
It's a venture fund capitalist that's a strip club owner that's come in and he's demanding that the state give him his damn data center. Welcome to 775 Alive,
a podcast focused on Nevada.
From Vegas to Reno to Elko.
We decode politics, economics, and critical global issues,
offering common sense perspectives true to our Nevada roots.
I'm Scott Gaworski, PhD historian.
And I'm Crystal Newton, business strategist.
Let's get into it.
Welcome back here to 775 Alive. Crystal and I are actually on opposite sides of the country right now. I'm in Virginia. But one of the things that's interesting about that is the issue we wanted to talk today. Virginia is actually the state that has the most experience with it. And that's actually the data center issue that's blown up.
Yeah, the data center is probably one of the most interesting topics on planet Earth. It's the biggest race going on right now on a national level, and on the state level, it couldn't be more controversial. And at the local level, people just don't know what to make of it and are pretty upset about it, Scott. I think you just came from a meeting from Elko, right?
Yeah. We had a Republican Party meeting this morning where we had a data center resolution, had a lot of conversation and going through it because, like a lot of places here in rural America generally, but particularly in rural Nevada, data centers is generating a huge backlash and one that is far more intense, I think, than a lot of people expected.
Yeah. We have our most critical resources to staying alive and staying well as a species being utilized by this new industry. So that's a legitimate concern. We have a national security concern in that if another country beats us to final AI, whatever that is, we will become subject to them. So the race couldn't be more dire from that perspective. And then you have to consider culturally what's going to happen when everybody has an AI assistant and we're no longer talking to each other like human beings. So I think a lot of people have a righteous fear in what this means to all of us.
Right. And unpacking it has been one of the problems, that we had spent a lot of time doing is what actually are we talking about here? I laugh at the stories, the one that just came out this week about the Imperial Valley in California.
Yeah. There's California's largest data center, largest planned data center. They're going through quite a bit of controversy, and it's a venture fund capitalist that's a strip club owner that's come in and he's demanding that the state give him his damn data center. And one of the big controversies is they have to fallow some farmland to free up some water rights for this plan.
Right. In an area, Imperial Valley, this is a huge agricultural region. They're the largest single regional user of Colorado River water. Like 80% of California's Colorado River water allotment goes to the Imperial Valley area, right? A lot of fruits grown there, dates and this type of stuff. But one of the interesting things about it is just watching this guy's odyssey. Because the current lawsuit he just filed was because the local irrigation water department refused him a permit to use water specifically because he wanted to use it for a data center. And he claims that goes against their existing policy. They can't dictate what water is going to be used for, which is one of the issues that's going on with all this. But come to find out, he's actually already gone through this step where he approached two of the cities down there with requests to use their wastewater. Their water, and both of them turned him down.
Oh, boy.
So, this whole thing is just blown up, right? And, of course, everybody's focusing on the fact he's a strip club owner, which should have nothing to do with this. But it just it explains a good part of this, how this is going all over the place. Whenever we bring up data centers, it's just like everything in the kitchen sink's getting thrown in.
Yeah. I did find some awesome captions at every level of this. I wanted to play some videos for you if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah.
So this first one is from the national level, U.S. Energy Secretary Christopher Wright, and this is his stance on data centers and AI.
Number one, no, you don't want China to lead in AI, not just to lose the economic benefits in the United States, but AI is critical for national security. The country that leads in AI is going to be the leading power in the coming century.
And so that's pretty standard, right? It's a pretty solid national stance. It's a good prerogative moving forward.
Something we've heard from the president on down, that we're in an AI race with China particularly. And
the overall plan. And then this next video clip illustrates what this looks like in implementation at the state level. We've got Governor Greg Abbott talking about, we want this in Texas, but we don't want it in people's backyards. So interesting look at that perspective.
Pushing back against these AI data centers that are trying to build in our neighborhoods. I made clear already, any AI data center even thinking about coming here, they got to bring their own money, bring their own power, reuse their own water, and do it in a way that reduces the cost of electricity for residents across our state.
So that's Greg Abbott. What do you think?
Well, and he hits a lot of the issues that really need to be talked about, right? Because some of the stuff that's going on here, tax abatements, where do you put these things? Who pays for the water they use? Who pays for the power they use?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So that's two levels of governance. And then I did want to give voice to an actual rural person on the ground looking at this, just to get an idea of how this level is responding to this industry.
Washington's saying it's overblown, but here in rural America, we're not buying it. Last week, the U.S. Energy Secretary basically told us all that we're exaggerating our concerns over data centers, that data center proponents should fight back. He called the fears of rural America overblown. But yet across rural America, farmers, ranchers, county commissioners, and even governors, they're all asking a very different question. Let me ask you guys something. If these concerns are overblown, why are so many people pushing back? Why are so many communities pushing back? That, guys, is the question that's getting harder to ignore, whether you're in DC or sitting in Silicon Valley.
Yeah. And so there it is, Scott. I mean, very familiar to us in Nevada. I hear a lot of the very same concerns coming out of Nevada. So this is, if you can make the case, this is a really important industry to put out there and implement and interweave into our society. You need to bring us along with you, you know?
Right. And not only the fact that I think, part of what they're identifying is that with all these other issues, the global race for AI, the government's policy, we have a real sense that people are being left out of the discussion. The local population's voice doesn't seem to matter. So, I mean, I think this is why this has emerged as such a poignant issue out of the blue. Of course, last year we talked with Adrian Marsh with Ultim Insights about some of the rural perspectives on AI. And, one of the things that came up is what's the deal with data centers? And at that time, this wasn't showing up in her research. Right? She was looking at rural Nebraska and nobody was talking about data centers. They were talking about AI in terms of teenagers and communications and this type of stuff. But boy, all of a sudden, a couple months later, this whole thing blows up.
Yeah. And I just want to clearly outline the relationship between data centers and AI. Data centers are the infrastructure for AI in the same way that the road system is the infrastructure for a car. And so we're building out the infrastructure for this AI to fully flourish. And I do think with most of the owners out there, the AI tech billionaire owners, most of them have some caution about what this may or may not do. So I really think this is worth talking about.
Well, yeah, and I don't think you're wrong at all, because that's really what's driving what we're seeing now is these data centers dedicated to AI. And I know that sounds pedantic, but I think one of the things to bear in mind is data centers themselves have been around for decades. I mean, the first one in Nevada really was set up in the late 1980s. So
Yeah.
different types of data centers, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
there's the dedicated data centers that have been around for decades that are just used by a business for whatever, control of processing in the minerals industry or something like that. Then there's these for rent data centers, right? Where basically they're massive racks of memory servers and whatnot that, a company would rent this server and the one next to it would be rented by another company. Again, those have been around for 20, 30 years. They're a key part of infrastructure. One of the biggest users of those type of data centers, hospitals, right?
Yeah.
The Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act's emphasis on electronic data records, they're not just sitting on somebody's hard drive back at the hospital. Neither one of those, which is really the origin of a lot of these tax abatements and our current sort of policy arrangements with data centers, these are not places that draw huge amounts of energy. They're not using huge amounts of water. They're not the problem, right? They've played safe with their neighbors for, like, again, 10, 20 years. It's these new quote unquote hyper centers that are going on for AI. Those are the ones that are using the new technologies. Those are the ones that are going to be energy extensive. And those are the ones that are really causing concern right now.
Yeah. And you really got to take some time to think about those first iterations of data centers were really servicing goods and services that we really wanted as a taxpayer. Like, of course, we want our hospitals to be able to administer massive amounts of data. And we want to be able to make cell phone calls, and we want to be able to go on the internet and do research. These are all things that people wanted, the things that people understood. But you're talking about AI and we're increasing capacity. This is not something that people are sure they want, and they're a little fearful of it. So we're creating a massive expansion to a system that was already there, but it's for a different purpose than what we originally wanted.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it, that what we had before is a lot of these data centers were geared to service other services, right? These new hypercenters are there for the AI, for the data itself. And I think that is marking a huge difference, not just in terms of their use, but their size and the infrastructure power and everything that goes into it. And this is why, one of the things we talked about in prepping this episode was the question of misinformation. How much misinformation or poor information is going wrong? So here's one that's not misinformation, but there's the statistics. Well, we're competing with China, but we have more than 5,000 data centers in the United States. China has 400. Why are we building more? Well, the simple answer is that 5,000 aren't the type of data centers we need. There are those other types that have been in place for decades, right? So already we're talking about two different things just in that, common bit of common knowledge that's floating around out there.
Yeah. So I really want to do a lot on the resource side because I know that's really important to people. That's where they're focused. But that's the biggest chunk of this conversation. Before we do that, I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about global and national security issues. So the reason that we're putting all of our money into this thing and the reason we're going at breakneck speed is because supposedly this is to win a battle that's an existential threat. And so we're trying to get the most dominant AI before our competitors do. And it's being positioned as an argument that this is life or death. So I think the first thing we need to really talk about is how could this thing possibly harm us? Because I think it is important to understand why this is a valuable thing to do. What do you see, Scott, as where does this place on the national security thing? Is this nuclear level? We got to tie this thing down and win this thing the way we did with nuclear, or is this overblown?
Well, I'd actually think, if you'll excuse the historian, I think there's three sort of issues here. One is strictly economics, right? There's a lot of money in AI for various purposes, commercial uses, right? And then I'm including entertainment. So there's concerns that if the U.S. lags behind, its dominant position economically as a leader in global entertainment, a leader in global commercial software and that type of stuff disappears. So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect is direct military, right? I think there's a lot of interest in these data centers. A good example, I think, is what we're seeing in Iran. And I have no specialized knowledge, but I would imagine, we're hearing these stories of massive drone attacks, and you have a system capable of taking out multiple drones at once. They're using some sort of AI modeling on the background of that just to handle the logistics of getting, kinetic rounds where they need to be to intercept those drones.
To your point, Scott, we've already seen this. Towards the end of last year, Ukraine had dumped a few semi-truckload cargo containers on the Russian side of the border that they had left. They're filled with drones. And at the push of a button, the tops of these containers open up and these drones come swarming out. And they swarmed a Russian city and did extraordinary damage. And it became a news story because we had never seen anything like it. But the assumption was that it was all an AI-powered attack.
Right. So there's the military. And then the third one is the Sputnik syndrome, right? When Sputnik was launched in 1957, it caught the Americans off guard. Oh, we need more science. All high schools got new science labs built in. Colleges got all this money to do scientific research. I think that's playing a factor in this as well strategically, that the research basis of the future is going to be based in AI. And if we don't develop that infrastructure now, it's going to put the U.S. behind in any type of scientific activity going forward.
Yeah. And I mean, it should be pointed out that while the national security argument is extraordinarily valid, it is understated the validity of the comment that this thing could wipe us out. And that's not hyperbolic language on my part. Every single AI owner has made a statement publicly saying they're not 100% certain they can control this thing. So a lot of caution here as well. This could save us and it could hurt us.
Well, look at your example of the Ukrainian attack using an AI motivated drone operation, right? We're just starting to see what could be some very dire repercussions, right, with this issue. So, bear that in mind as we go forward.
Yeah. So I suppose we should dive into the resource issue.
Well, that's all. I mean, if you have a strategic interest, identifying the strategic goal is only part of the equation. Getting there is the more difficult part, and that's where we're really breaking it down right now.
Well, yeah, and as you dive into the resource issue, you're really talking about the real consequences of this industry. And our most valuable resources are power and water, and that's the most critical right now to our survival as people. And we're going to be allocating these resources, which are very strained, to this thing. So we want to make sure it's worthwhile and actually get to the bottom of just, are they water inefficient or are they not? Are they taking up all the electricity or are they not? What is actually going on?
Yeah, and that's harder to answer. So the water issue, of course, we were joking about Imperial Valley in California, but there's an example where there's already an increased water usage for agriculture, and of course, here in the 775, water issues are that old Nevada adage, right? Whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting.
Yeah.
Right.
That goes to my human argument, because that Imperial Valley data center, we are literally choosing data centers over farmland. And that's a serious decision for a society to make.
Right. And one that, again, you talk about strategic issues, you're taking your farmland out for what might be a temporary military or scientific advantage.
Well, relying on imports for your food source is an extraordinary national risk.
Right. Now that said, I mean, one of the things you got to remember is the U.S. is only using something like 25 or 30% of its arable farmland anyway, right? It's not like we're maxing at capacity and trying to max out yields. Not that that shouldn't be part of the discussion, but
Well,
um,
it is very important though, Scott, because a farmer will tell you that it takes them 20 years to develop the soil and it takes them that much time to become a good farmer. So to say that there's farmland available if we need it, it makes it sound like you can just flip a switch and turn on production. And that is not how it goes. It's so important to understand. Once you turn off farmland, it can take 10 to 20 years to turn back on.
that's a fair point, but it gets to the issue about infrastructure,
Yeah.
right? I mean, is this the new infrastructure that's going to sustain us, or do we need to continue old forms of this
Yeah. And every
infrastructure?
farmer I tell that they're like, there's people out there that believe that they can get AI to farm, and every one of them laughs in my face.
Right. Well, and part of the irony we're talking about is actually one of the more interesting uses right now of AI is actually agricultural communities, right? Where you have dedicated AI systems, these smaller data centers that are basically you can feed in crop details on a massive field, and the AI system will work out the deficiencies in the soil analysis and adjust the fertilizer patterns and the watering patterns to maximize yields, right? Now, that's not the same as the AI farming, but it's something we couldn't do 20 years ago. And it represents sort of the tension here, right? Here's a benefit to communities because if these farmers or ranchers can maximize their yields, of course, that means more money coming in for less inputs, which means more profit.
I'm lucky that I have decades of different types of growing experience, enough to say that the idea that AI could grow at scale and it not be completely a wreck. People always think gardening is so much easier than it is. And to be able to look at a straight face, look at me and say, we can program this thing to farm perfectly. Again, it just makes me want to laugh.
AI, and that's a fair enough point. But water's another issue because that's not something that's just related to farm, right? The question here is you have agencies that want to cut back on farm allotments for agriculture to be sent to the mines. That's been an argument that's been going on back to the late 19th century here in the 775. But now you add AI into this equation, these data centers, and it's really, people are perking up like, why are we spending our water supplies when you say we can't bring in new residents because we don't have the water? You can't, we'll have to take water back from ranchers. So they're going to have to cut back the size of their herds because we don't have water. And oh, by the way, data center, here's 180 acre feet to get started, right?
So I just want to lay this out like from an industrial technical perspective, and the reason why people are up in arms about this. I think a lot of people have heard about the evaporative cooling technology, which loses upwards of 80% of the water. It's the most efficient technology because if you don't evaporate off heat, what happens is you have to use a closed loop system, and then you have to interface that water with thermal conductive plates. It takes a ton of surface area. They're very expensive and they're very big. But data centers have moved towards the closed loop systems, specifically in response to people's concern about water use. And so when people hear about the water consumption of data centers, they're more of anecdotal and older versions of data center technology that's moving forward. These centers won't be using evaporative technology. But I did talk to one state official that pointed out to me that Raider Stadium uses evaporative cooling technology, and nobody has anything to say about that water being lost to the atmosphere.
Well, and this is one of the issues we see, right? Another part of this information floating around on the pro data center side as well. If you total up all the golf courses in the U.S., they use tons more water a year. Yeah, but a lot of that water is going back into the ground and eventually reaching the aquifer. It's not being taken out. All these closed loop systems have some problems because it's not just, the plating and whatnot you're talking about. Yeah, they're expensive. They also take a lot of power to run, right? So now you're adding pumps and everything else. But
That is the trade-off.
Yeah. And some of these are starting to use additives to the water to increase their cooling efficiency. And again, that creates another environmental hazard. What happens? Some of these stories we're starting to hear about the effluent from data centers being contaminated seems to be from this is that these chemical compounds they're adding to increased efficiency in the water are starting to show up in their wastewater and municipality systems and the natural environment and plan to take account of this.
I was going to say it, Scott, it's antifreeze.
Yeah. Well, we're not a technical podcast, nor do we claim to be. But yeah,
no. But when they say they reclaim it, I'm like, but at the end of the day, you've got some really contaminated water, and I'm almost afraid to ask, what do you do with that water when you're done with it? Wait, don't answer that question. I don't think I want to know.
Right. Well, and this is this is part of the discussion that needs to be had, but particularly given this country's less than stellar history, shall we say, of water waste. I mean, I grew up close to Cleveland, Ohio, where back in the '60s the river caught fire, right? Because of the pollution in it. So, and again, the water issue, I think, impacts some core questions about communities. It's also very unclear. Again, you pointed out these older evaporative systems that probably aren't going to be used going forward as much, that are really water intensive. But I think there's also some real questions that these new systems, we don't have clear data on how much water to use. I mean, I'm hearing some that are like, oh yeah, we've got a closed loop system that's been operating for 4 or 5 years and we just put 8,000 gallons of water in it. Well, that's nothing, right? If you're doing that and topping off 40 gallons a year, there's no water impact, right? But if that's not the case, we need to know.
Again, I don't know enough about it, but just thinking about it from a common sense perspective, the evaporative cooling might lose 80% of the water, but what is the actual loss? Because that's going to go into the atmosphere and come back down as rain back into the aquifer. So it's not entirely certain that you would lose that water. It would enter into the natural cycle. But for sure, the closed loop system is going to introduce some pretty caustic chemicals and cost quite a bit electrically. So I'm on the fence at the end of the day on this one.
But particularly point out in an evaporative system, one of the problems is it might enter the ecosystem, but not where you are. So for the 775,
I don't want to go water Wyoming. I get you.
Yeah.
Or God forbid, have Northern Nevada rain go down to Las Vegas. That would really chap us all.
Right. And that's been one of the big issues. I think a far more interesting one, though, and one that's emerging, because I think the water arguments are tamping down a bit as people get a better understanding. But power usage is ramping up drastically. I mean, we just had the president, who's been promoting an AI thing for these strategic purposes, promote this ratepayer protection pledge to try to force AI companies to pay for their power usage without increasing people's power bills.
I think that's a great news, that people should be happy about that they're actually being looked after and considered by the states in that way. I think they're doing a great job. And this is one of those things, when you have an emerging industry, there's a lot of fits and starts, and there's technological advances that happen on the fly. There's regulatory changes that happen on the fly. And so your perspective on this industry at any one moment is going to quickly become obsolete. So I think people need to keep that in mind when they think about this industry. But when it comes to electricity, here's the lay of the land. 80% of these data centers are going to be hypercenters, which means they're wholly owned by people like Amazon or Microsoft or Tesla or these big guys. And their number one cost input is electricity. Now, if they hook up to our public grid system, they're going to be subject to the free market, and they're going to be paying much higher rates than if they just create their own source of power. So 80% of this market is going to be strongly incentivized to make their own power. Now, there are pockets around the country where you hear people scream about increases in electricity costs as much of like 2 to 3 times, like their electricity bill's gone up. That's horrifying. But these are cases where small data centers have plugged into an already exacerbated grid. So it's going to be pockets where this happens, but it's going to happen less and less. And I think people can feel pretty well insulated that both the state is demanding this and the industry itself is naturally incentivized to create their own power source. So I think this is going to be okay.
I'm going to disagree because I think that, no, I think this is issues where you're right on the small data centers, right? That's where a lot of this information is coming from. And requiring data centers to have their own power generation seems like it makes sense. But right now that opens up a whole nother permitting. Basically to power a data center that might require 2 gigawatts of power, that's building a massive power plant, right? And we're struggling to get power plants built. And I do think it's complicated because you mentioned this 200 or 300% increase in prices for electricity. That's absolutely true. But this is not the first time we're seeing those increases. I mean, going back to California's rates are exorbitant. And a large part of it is so much of you have a regulatory environment that's forcing power companies to invest in less than optimal and methods, solar, wind, this other stuff.
Green energy products.
Well, and there's uses for green energy products, but Nevada Energy, right, which services most of the 775. For instance, they're in the process of this 20-year update plan they have to do for the Public Utilities Commission every 20 years. And they're planning over the next 20 years of adding 10 gigawatts of power, which would basically double Nevada's generation capacity, right? But they probably have 20, 30 gigawatts of potential demand. So how's that going to be met? But the big problem is out of that 10 gigawatts by Nevada statute, like a lot of states have to be renewable resources that so far been proven to meet demands.
Yeah.
So, you have a system that's being built onto that can't support it to begin with. Right.
Well, and I'd just like to take this moment to point out that, one of our bigger umbrella ideas as conservatives is you want to keep government small. And the reason why green energy has interjected itself into all of this and kind of gunked up the energy sector is because the federal government decided mostly under the Biden administration that they wanted to invest a bunch of money into this energy, and states that committed to making a certain percentage of their energy green, there was a grant available and they took the grant. But this is a perfect example of how when the federal government gets bigger, it can gunk up the free market.
Right. And it's not just the federal. I mean, the states have been doing this for much longer, and as the federal government. I mean, certainly the Biden administration didn't just create this idea of green energy. We've seen that for a quarter century already. And you also seen efforts to permit, there's a lot of talk here right now about modular nuclear. Certainly we've had a lot of talk up here. The question is, could a modular nuclear reactor potentially power a data center as well? Look at the number of states that are taking nuclear, that just have basically banned nuclear power. And again, to be honest, these modular reactors, just the first real production series of them got turned on right before July 4th up in Idaho National Laboratories. So, they're an emerging technology as well. So, we're building a big infrastructure that's going to be based on power we might not be able to provide.
Yeah. And the nuclear thing has always been very interesting because that's one of those highly political things where the science and the infrastructure value is really great on nuclear, but the public opinion is not there. And what's interesting to me is when you have grid failures and people can't get cool enough in hot weather or warm enough in cold weather, you have actual deaths. So it's just interesting because nuclear power could give you the energy to prevent those deaths, but we're not using nuclear power because we're afraid of potential deaths that might come from it. And that's just an interesting pinch point. It's one of the things that makes politics so interesting.
Right. And I think if we're talking resources, there's one other one we need to talk about too, and that is environmental impact, and that includes impact on humans.
Yeah.
There's increasing concern that these hyper data centers are producing not radiation in the sense of hard radiation like a nuclear plant, but not only
Sound
audible noise.
radiation.
Well, yeah, but it's not just audible sound. That's the problem. It's also this low frequency, I guess that'd be sub audio sound that you measure in dBCs. That's actually seems to be, we've got a lot of evidence now that this is damaging. And we don't have the way to monitor this. This is really not something that's heavily embedded within environmental codes and policies, certainly not at the local level. And it's something else that's sparking a lot of argument around these data centers is, they put in a data center and the farmer's cows next door giving birth to stillborn, right? This is something that really probably needs to be investigated, particularly since, and this relates to the other two issues, a lot of these data centers are being placed next to residential houses. You heard Greg Abbott talk about neighborhoods, right? They're putting data centers in rural Texas neighborhoods, right? People would have far less sense if this was 40 miles away in the middle of nowhere, right? But the problem is you can't afford to build the power lines, the power generations to that remote facility and get the data back out. I mean, one of the reasons Nevada is so attractive to data center companies is the lag time. The Silicon Valley's reduced, right? The response back and forth goes quick.
Yeah, I think you can kind of predict that if there are going to be problematic data centers, it'll be the smaller level ones that are plugging into local grid systems and straining them and finding these little spots. They can't afford to build their own data cable, and you need to have a data cable to hook up to your data center and connect it to the main infrastructure line. And, if you're 20, 40 miles away from that, that's, it could be upwards of $1 million a mile, probably even more, or probably, I don't know what the number is, but it would be extraordinarily expensive to hook up to. So I think the problem children of the data center industry are going to be your smaller level ones that can't afford to be outside of neighborhoods, that can't afford to not hook up to the grid. I think that's where we're going to get most of our problems with this industry.
I'm going to disagree because I think the smaller data centers aren't the ones that are doing the volume of traffic that cause problems, nor are they the ones that are generating the waste heat. They're not generating the massive amounts. I mean, we're talking about these big, like that Box Elder Canyon data center that's so controversial next door in Utah. It's really these big data centers that are serving AI. Because remember, part of it, when AI companies are talking efficiency, it's not just processing the data, it's getting data back in and back out to the end user. And so you start putting 40 miles on, it's traveling the speed of light, but there's actually going to be a lag time. And the longer those cables are, the more the lag time is. So it's not just the cost of putting in the infrastructure, it's the fact that you're going to have a massive amount of data slower.
Yeah.
Right. So I really think it's the hyper centers again that's causing the going to be causing the real issue, because that's the one they're wanting to put like next door to cities.
Okay.
Right.
Well, we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there is actually one more resource that we really need to talk about.
Okay.
And that is the resource of taxpayer dollars.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So a lot of controversy. The big sticking point that I think people are centering around right now is you have this idea that you're going to invest $10 billion into a data center and only get 10 jobs out of it. And is this a good investment for Nevada? Are we really putting in $1 million to get one job?
Well, and I think it's twofold, and it might help to break some of this down. So jobs front, this is the interesting thing about data centers. They don't actually require a lot of people to operate.
No, they
This
do
isn't
not.
like putting in a mine or a factory, right? I mean, some of these data centers, I mean, a good sized one might need a staff of 20 on a day-to-day basis,
Yeah.
right? Now, they're probably going to need a few hundred to build a data center, right? And that's one of the things that traditionally that type of dynamic has been very attractive to small rural towns. And I think that's one of the things that accidentally triggered this, right? Because small rural towns, so you get a big construction project, you get a new hotel, you get some fast food places, you get some extra sales tax that you can use to fix the sidewalks, but you don't have to have all of a sudden 800 residents. Once the construction is done, they leave. You get 20 new people, which you could easily handle, and you go back to being a small town, right?
Yeah.
And usually residents
20 jobs is going to generate an economic boom.
Right. Well, what generates the boom is the construction, right?
Sure.
And that's one of the things.
But the construction is short term. It's like a year or two. So I don't see anyone investing for 2 years of profits.
Well,
who's going to open a new coffee shop because there's going to be construction workers for 2 years?
Well, actually, a lot of places do. No, I've seen it. A good example of this, actually, if we can get outside the U.S., St. John's, British Columbia in Canada, on the Alaska Highway. That's where those Alberta oil sands, it turned into a refinery issue. And, over the course of 3 years, all of a sudden they have every fast food restaurant. What they're depending on is, like any business, it's the capital infrastructure that's expensive. And that 2 years of construction can get you that capital infrastructure to build the McDonald's or whatever, right? And then you'll probably have enough business to keep it going. It's not going to turn a huge profit. That's the game that's been played traditionally. Now, the question of tax abatements, particularly property tax abatements, is far more damaging. There's a general argument, should governments be doing this? And this, a lot of people would argue, has been a very effective tool to encourage development. I mean, that's one of the reasons Nevada since 2015 has had this data center tax abatement plan, right? To encourage these data centers to come in. And it's based on how many employees you use during its construction that are Nevada residents. It's how many employees you're going to employ at the end that are data residents. And there's requirements, right? They just don't give you the abatements. But the two problems this does is, A, who the heck's tracking this? And that's something that GOED, the Governor's Office of Economic Development, has really not been able to answer. I mean, it's self-reported, but is anybody at the state verifying when you say that 80% of your construction force is Nevada residents, that really 80% of your workforce is Nevada residents?
Yeah.
But for local community...
I just want to point out that we were in Winnemucca was promised 3,000 jobs at that work camp. And the Winnemucca residents can tell you that the people at those jobs are all imported from California, and most of them are part of an ex-convict program out of California. And you can be damn sure nobody expected that to happen.
This is with that Lithium Americas project.
Yeah.
Right? And that's exactly the type of stuff people are worried about with data centers. Not so much on the ex-convict. I think that's an interesting program, but we don't need to go on to it here.
Well, it didn't employ our people, and that was what we were led to believe.
And I think that's been an argument up here for years with the mining industry. They don't hire local people, and that's why a lot of people don't like them up here. So that's part of it. But I think the more important issue on taxes is local governments actually depend on that property tax revenue. And if the state sort of steps in and takes that property tax issue off the table, or what we see just happening in Boulder City, where Boulder City sort of turned down a data center and the federal government let them go next door on some federal land and open up. Now, the Boulder City gets all the expenses of the problems of a data center, doesn't get any tax revenue because it's federal land. And I think...
Isn't that also, it moved towards next door to a wildlife refuge?
Right. Which gets back to these environmental issues, right?
Yeah.
So, and again, that's part of the issue I think that's going on here. And actually, I think, thanks for bringing up this tax issue, because I think this is one that links to at least what I think is probably a bigger reason why data centers are blown up, is that these are good examples of where local government authorization and higher levels of government and the population are not on the same page.
Yeah.
Right. And I
But
think
that
that's
shouldn't be viewed as conspiratorial. This is just the dynamic of an emerging industry. It moves so fast and you're racing against your competitors so quickly that it is hard to bring the public along. Not to excuse it. I think they should do better, but I mean, on our side, we should really take a moment to understand just how fast this race goes.
well, that's the race is one thing, and I don't think you're necessarily wrong, but we do have some real problems with these data centers. I mean, we've got some examples of these data centers where they force local county commissioners to sign non-disclosure agreements to
Yeah,
talk about what they were approving. I mean, that's just nonsense,
that is
right?
upsetting.
Yeah, right. There are claims of eminent domain. I'm not familiar with an actual case of eminent domain where the government seized the land for a data center, but we're doing this in the shadow of Kelo versus New London, right? Which was a 2005 Supreme Court case, where basically they were building a shopping center and the town of New London seized this person's house, arguing that the economic benefits of the tax center, the sales taxes, the construction taxes, the employed workforce, was a public use that justified seizing the land. And the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, agreed to that. And this is the exact same dynamic. And in that case, early 2000s, shopping malls weren't new technology.
Yeah. And that NDA thing really does disturb me. I know that after Lithium Americas got their permit approved by the Humboldt County Commission, they then had them sign an NDA. And from that point forward, we don't know what's being talked about between commissioners and Lithium America in that county. And it really disturbs the people that are in that city. They're very, very smart people. They dig into everything. They watch everything. And they were just left in the dark after the permit was issued. And they're not happy about that.
Right. And that's one of the things is also, I think you have local governments. I mean, this leads to the conspiratorial thinking. And, I could see very limited uses of NDAs. If you're debating on setting up a KFC and they force you to sign an NDA so you don't release their, 11 secret herbs and spices, that's okay.
Yeah, proprietary information, totally.
Understand.
Yeah.
Right. But the idea you can't talk about the project at all is just totally antithetical to any idea of transparent government.
Certainly
Right.
undemocratic.
Right. And I think that's irritating a lot of people.
Yeah.
And remember, I mean, most of the viewers probably know I currently sit on the Elko County Planning Commission, right? Which is it's a volunteer community position. And, the truth is that trying to explain planning decision making to people in the best of circumstances often tends to be difficult, right? And trying to explain something that's special. For instance, one of the things that has this being talked about in these data centers is, they're using those lithium ion batteries for backup storage. The same things that they won't let you carry on airplanes because they're afraid they're going to catch fire and blow up, right? And that's the type of stuff that needs to be openly discussed at local governments. They need that information, if no other reason, to develop a response plan if a fire breaks out. So this is a very nasty and complex issue. And just saying, well, we need to get it done now doesn't justify sidestepping a process that people are saying is already, we don't really know what we're doing, and rushing into it.
Yeah. I have to say though, the numbers for Nevada for this industry really look solid to me in terms of an investment. We have Governor's Office of Economic Development. They are investing $457 million. And that's represented by various cuts and tax credits. And so the taxpayer is investing $450 million. And there was a lot of things waived for this industry. And I think a lot of people focused on the things that were waived, but nobody has really given any thought or attention to the things that were not waived, One of the things that was not waived was a 2% tax that goes into the general education fund. The state couldn't constitutionally waive that. And so these data centers actually have to pay that. And that is a tax on their equipment. So right now there's $40 billion worth of data center projects going into the state of Nevada. 2% of that is approximately 800 million. We're not going to get all of that because some of that's building costs, construction costs. But every 7 years, not every 7 years, but starting 7 years from the original investment, these data centers replace their servers, 1/7 of their servers every year thereafter. And so that's going to generate between $50 and $100 million a year in tax revenue. So all in all, the first 10 years, we're going to break $1 billion back for that 450 million we put in. So that's solid. That's absolutely solid.
Yeah, if it pans out.
If it pans out.
Well, yeah. No, I mean this is a real thing. So there's two things, one positive, one negative. One, I remain much learier than you are that AI has a viable future at the scale they're planning.
Yeah.
Right. I think we're going to find some. I think we're going to see some uses for AI, but the problem is it's going to do all this stuff isn't going to happen. So what happens if you do these tax abatements and put in a 10-acre data center, 100,000 square feet building that's 20-foot high concrete walls, and 3 years from now they're out of business, right? So and you don't get the education benefits. There's no property taxes to collect because the company's bankrupt, and now these counties are on the hook for a brownfield that's going to have to be restored somehow. Now, on the other hand, one thing you did point out where the education comes in is some of the hope for this is that if these data centers come in, they do require an educated workforce, not a large. But the hope is if Nevada has these data centers, then it can start attracting a new educated workforce to do stuff like develop AI projects and be in close connection to these data centers, right? So one of the things that this potentially does, and again, if I don't know the last time you've been to Salt Lake City, that I-15 corridor from Salt Lake down to Provo, right, where Adobe and all these tech firms, it's like a mini Silicon Valley right now. And, that's what they hope to do. And that's why you put the money into education, where you can hopefully increase STEM programs, encourage entrepreneurs like Elon Musk, next generation Elon Musk to set up, or Steve Jobs to set up here in Nevada and draw for that. But again, both of these are really speculative projects. They don't guarantee you're gonna actually achieve these goals. And if they don't, it's a lot of public money that's been dangling.
Well, and the complaint has been that the only thing that Nevada is going to get out of this is the construction boom. And I would say that is your one, what do you call it? That's hedging your bets with that investment, because I do think we will get a lot of upfront capital with the construction boom. And so in a way, we are going to get something out of this for sure. But you're right. The long-term playoff for this industry is, the richest, most powerful people in the world want this to work. But at the end of the day, can humans really build something that's smarter than them? I remain skeptical.
Well, no, I think it's an interesting issue because one of the things we've been arguing about and putting this together is what's our conclusion on data centers? And we've sort of come, not so much are they good or bad, but why is this exploded now, right? Why in the first half of 2026 is all of a sudden something that was on nobody's radar last fall blowing up, right? And your take is a little different than mine, so I'll defer and let you go first. What do you think's actually driving it? What is the root of a lot of this anger at data centers?
I think human beings we're built for common sense, and we're built to adopt and absorb things at a certain speed. And I think this is just too much of a change too fast without people having that collaborative feeling of being brought along in the conversation and being listened to. I think it all just happened way too fast. I don't like it either. I don't feel good about it, but I do recognize that if we're not first in the world, we will become subject to whoever is first. So I'm not enthusiastic, but I recognize the value and I recognize that this fight's a worthwhile one to have.
But do you think that people who are upset, who oppose data centers, it's because they don't see this future, or do you think it's something deeper that's driving them? And
That's what I'm saying is I think we're just grappling with that deeper psychological need to fully understand something before we engage with it at full speed.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So that's an interesting take. My take on this is that a lot of this anger is actually being driven less by data centers than I think we're at an inflection point in politics. I think what we're seeing is that data centers have become a lightning rod because it easily expresses a lot of frustrations people are having with government, right? In some ways, I see this as an extension of the COVID anti-government turn, if one will. People who are already upset that, why is the Planning Commission approving this? Why is the Planning Commission not stopping this? Why is the County Commission even talking to these people? And then they find out that there's some of this sketchy stuff going over 3 states, and they start wondering, well, geez, they're talking about this big industrial plant, what that's going to be, and nobody can answer me. I think that's why we're seeing this bubbling up. I think the deeper issue driving it isn't even really the AI or the data centers. I think it's a frustration with how government policy is being set.
Yeah, I mean, we've already felt like we've lost a lot of control over our lives, and now it feels like we're going to lose so much more, and it's not feeling good.
And this is an issue. I know we're in the process, Crystal, you're reaching out to some people to talk about water. We've done a lot of episodes on AI, so I imagine this is going to be an issue we're going to be coming back to quite a bit here over the next couple months.
Yeah, I guess this issue is kind of the pre-fight to the water episode because that's the big fight.
Yeah, and a lot of interesting things going on there. So anyway, until next time, I'm Scott Gaworski.
And I'm Crystal Newton.
And we'll see you around the 775.
Thank you for listening to 775 Alive.
Nevada Roots, Global Issues.
Subscribe on YouTube or X.
And on most podcast streaming services.
You can email us at info@775alive.com.
Or send us a message via carrier pigeon.